Welcome to the first of a two-part conversation focusing on Stay Linked and VDC Research recent study, Making Supply Chain Resilience Work, Keeping Up with Ever-Demanding Warehouse Operations. In today's part one, we will be diving into supply chain resilience in today's landscape, what's important to the customer experience now, and how that has changed over the last few years, and the importance of foundational systems in order to adopt newer technologies in your operation. I hope you enjoy these insights and be sure to reach out to let us know your thoughts on the topics discussed.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse podcast here, and I am joined today by Justin Griffith. He is the CTO at StayLinked, and also David Krebs. He is the EVP of Enterprise Mobility and AIDC with the VDC Research Group. And I'm going to be joined by them today because we're going to talk about a recent research study that was conducted by David and a VDC Research Group on behalf of StayLinked. And it's called Making Supply Chain Resilience Work, Keeping Up with Ever Demanding Warehouse Operations. And as we know, warehouse operations are definitely ever demanding, but they're also ever evolving as well, as we see lots of technology come into play here. And we're going to talk a little bit about that and what the market is seeing and how they're interpreting technology, utilizing it, adopting it, maybe not adopting it. And we'll see a little bit about that. So before we kind of dive into some of the findings and the understandings of this report, David, why don't you give us a little brief overview about the study? What was the intention and some of the background on it?
So first of all, just a brief introduction to VDC research and the work that we do. So I'm responsible for covering two technology practices at VDC research, and one of the practices looks at what we call the enterprise mobility connected worker, and that really addresses the use of digital solutions by today's frontline mobile workforce. So those are workers in warehouses, delivery driver, retail, and variety of other sort of industry. So those that spend most of their day on their feet and need access to information sort of in real time to be able to respond to customer requirements or collaboration needs, etc. And then the other practice looks very closely at data capture technology. So everything from traditional line of sight barcode solutions to RFID and machine vision, and how they're being utilized in, again, a variety of environments, including logistics and warehouse distribution center, as well as retail and healthcare and manufacturing spaces. So we've been doing this as an organization for many, many years, and we've been working with the Staylink team for the last couple of years on a piece of research. And really the intent here or behind the research was to produce a report on a annual or every 18-month basis to really be able to sort of monitor and track trends over time as it pertained to warehouse and logistics technology investments. And one of the initial sort of, I guess, hypotheses or points that we wanted to emphasize in the research was that, warehouse and logistics technology decision makers were being faced with sort of a barrage of new technologies,
Mm.
and many of which certainly have the opportunity to address a lot of the complexities and challenges that they were facing. But we also wanted to look at how well they were responding to either trialing, piloting, testing, and the challenges that they were facing. Were these technologies mature enough? Was the infrastructure or their infrastructure mature enough to be able to effectively test them? Did they have, sort of the necessary understanding and the capabilities and the resources to do so? So that was, one of the things that we were hoping to measure and test over time with the research. So this paper that we just published is the second version of the research. The research was conducted over the course of the last 12 months. So the time during which we have done this research has been during some of the most, I would say, dynamic, disruptive, whatever you want to call it, periods of time
Yeah.
when we look at sort of the warehouse and logistics spaces. So certainly interesting to have that as a backdrop. But essentially, it's a primary research-driven piece of content whereby we've fielded a survey amongst, I think it was around 250 technology decision makers
Mhm.
that were involved in sort of their warehouse operations and making decisions around warehouse technology decisions.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I think it's very interesting too that you touched on just the maybe overwhelming at times number of technologies that are out there in the market now. I mean, it feels like over the last couple of years, there's just been an explosion on cutting edge technology within the warehouse space. It's been pretty wild. I mean, I think even if you walked into like a pro mat in 2023, you could be pretty overwhelmed by just seeing the amount of different automation, robotics technology that was all around. So definitely very interesting to see this report and this study to find out where people are at on that spectrum compared to what you actually see out there on display and demos and fancy videos and all those things. So very interesting. So Justin, why don't you give us kind of a little bit of background from the Staylink perspective on why you kind of went for this report and what it kind of means to you, you guys.
Yeah, so we do a huge amount of sort of technology investigation. We have a number of customers who would be investigating all of these different technologies, and we just kind of kept feeling like almost like the hype of a lot of the new technologies were sort of running away with it. And we wanted to look at kind of building this year over year perspective of the technology and of the adoption and how much of that was actually panning out, right? How much of the adoption could actually be shown in the data. But we also wanted to look at a different dimension for the survey and tying that to the age of the warehouse management systems. And that was sort of an angle that we sort of felt was being not really looked at in a lot of the technology strategy analysis. Was going, okay, how old is the system that you need these things to talk to? Because a number of the technologies we're just sort of talking about that part of it like it's the easiest bit. Like, okay, yeah, we've got this great new technology and it's going to have this huge impact on your warehouse and on your operations. And all you got to do is just hook those things up, right? That's all you have to do. And what we were finding was that's where it was falling down. We had this hypothesis that had a huge impact on the success or failure of an adoption of any number of technologies, and that they all kind of had the same drawback, that was a huge element that was kind of being ignored. And I think it's interesting sort of what we found in the data, this correlation between those two data points, the age and the investment of the warehouse management system and a company's ability to adopt and have success with new technologies. So I think we're on year 2 of this. I think we're going to continue to find that those two affect one another. There's a causal link between those two data points.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was interesting to see that in the study as I read through was that there is kind of this I don't know if you would call it maybe an awakening a little bit, right? Of realization that we need to invest in technology to be able to keep up and be competing against competition and just be able to deliver on consumer expectations. But the also realization that, hey, maybe this WMS or this system that we've been holding on to for X amount of years is not necessarily going to allow us to adopt those types of things, and maybe we need to upgrade, maybe we need to look at some different type of system. So I mean, tell us a little bit about, from your perspective, like how important, as we look at all these new technologies that are coming out, I mean, how important is having that foundational system in place to be able to accelerate and evolve your operation?
Well, we found, just to pick up on Justin's point that he was making, I mean, the research was fairly clear on this point, and some of it, I guess, is fairly intuitive, right? When you're thinking about, introducing or integrating new technologies into an environment that's, sort of already operational. And so one of the questions that we were asking, in the research is, what is the age and what version of WMS are you currently running on? And we, provided a couple of answers, starting with the most current and then going back, several generations, etc. And so the comparison between this most recent, piece of research and the first one we did a couple of years back was the respondents that said that they were on the most current version increased from about 30% the first time we did the research to about 45.5% the second time, or the most recent time we did the research. So I do want to throw a caveat in here, in the sense that while this is a representative sample, it is not the same sample. Each time, so we didn't ask the same exact organizations, but we did take a representative sample of organizations, so you can make correlation between the two. So that was a huge jump, and I certainly point to, again, going back to what's transpired over the last 24, 36 months. I think the emphasis on supply chain operations, even the notion of supply chain resilience, which has become a sort of a bit of an invoked term, has certainly elevated. And I think the investment, and maybe e-commerce was at sort of the epicenter of this, at least recently. But sort of the notion of supply chain as a boardroom topic has certainly increased as well. And I think that a lot of organizations, took to heart some of the supply chain issues that had transpired. Not that they would have been able to effectively address them with any level of modernization, but certainly they could have been better prepared. So I think that we did see an accelerated investment in upgrading or modernizing their underlying infrastructure, because when looking at those that had a quasi-modern or up-to-date infrastructure versus those that were running on 3 years or 3 versions behind, 4 versions behind, and comparing that to their ability to, again, take advantage of newer technologies, be able to integrate them more seamlessly, address time to value more effectively, there was a direct correlation between those two groups and sort of the issues they perceived as a result of those. So again, some of it seems very intuitive, but the reality is that a lot of times in logistics spaces, this has been a sort of sweat your asset type of environment. It's not unusual to see sort of legacy WMS systems that have been coded years and years ago, and no one remembers who's done the coding or where the documentation is. I mean, those are still very much today's realities. So that certainly came through in the research, and so it was I guess reassuring to see that be sort of validated by the research that we conducted.
Yeah, very interesting. And I love the sweat your asset, by the way. I saw that mentioned in the study there as well. So Justin, what about your thoughts there?
No, I think in talking about the supply chain resilience, I think David's absolutely right, in that most companies are not logistics companies, right? They have a logistics operation, and so when they looked at investments, it was kind of like, is it broken? No, then don't go fixing it, right? Yeah. And so I think we've had the sort of clearest example of what could go wrong over the last couple of years, and okay. Can you plan for that? Could you address that? No, but it did highlight sort of where these investments could have helped people fare better or respond quicker. But I also think it shed some light on the technology discussion as a whole. When we talk about these technologies, are we saying they're ahead of their time? Is that necessarily related to the technology itself, or is that more related to the market's general ability to consume new technologies as a whole? So it isn't even about the particular technologies being ahead of their time. It's more like the market sort of consumed that this is a necessary piece of the business that we have to invest in if we ever want any hope of getting to automation or RFID or any one of the technologies that we looked at here. And I think that's what we were really trying to expose in the study, was that the more you keep up on these things, or the more you look at systems that are overlays or things like that, things that allow you more choices, that definitely became the bigger theme over the last couple of years, where especially in 2022 and 2023, it became less about picking the correct technology and more about setting yourself up to be able to pick whatever technology when you need it, in whatever proportion you needed it, right? So it might not be picking AMRs and going all in on AMRs. It was more about set me up on a system, on a platform, on a WMS that can give me AMRs if I discover I need it. Right? I need options right now. And I think that's what we're seeing play out in a lot of these technologies. There's not kind of one technology to rule them all. And in truth, there never was. There's not going to be some great replacement of, any one particular technology over the other. It looks like it's going to be 10% of this and 15% of that, and sort of this mix of different technologies. But the underlying system is what allows that in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such an interesting way to put it, is being able to, I guess, have that flexibility overall in the long term. And I think that kind of translates so much to what we've seen. And I think it was David mentioned in there about the, kind of e-commerce explosion over the pandemic and things like that, how that really adjusted things for people who were maybe primarily just doing brick and mortar distribution before, and that was their sales channel. They had to figure out how to do things differently. And, there's, justifiably a lot of different things that happen in order to do, each pick for e-commerce versus sending out cases or pallets to a retail outlet. Right. So, talk to us a little bit about, from the perspective of, higher investment in technology and reassessing companies, their technology foundation, as we're discussing here, with their systems and things like that. How much do you think like e-commerce in a sense is driving that investment versus like regular traditional B2B distribution, or potentially other forms of distribution?
Yeah, I might go back to sort of this theme of supply chain, resilience
Hmm.
again, and maybe try to answer it in the context, of that. Again, as I said before, it's not necessarily that new a term, but it certainly has one that has gotten a fair amount of mind share over the last couple of years. And
Oh yeah.
from our perspective, yeah, for sure, it's really about the agility, right, and the ability to respond, and the flexibility to be able to respond, effectively. As Justin mentioned, no one could have predicted, the disruption or the level or the impact of the disruption that supply chain operations experienced during the pandemic. But there were certainly organizations that were better prepared to respond, and I guess, quote unquote, fared better. And that, from our perspective, is those that sort of had the infrastructure in place, had the practices in place that provided that necessary agility. And what does that really mean? When we look at sort of traditional supply chain risk management, that's really about a very inward, like within my own organization, within, what can I control, and how do I respond to risks? I think, when we're thinking about sort of supply chain resilience, it's really across the entire supply chain, as it should be. Now, it might be a bit of a fool's errand. Supply chain is super complex and
Yeah.
involves,
Yeah.
hundreds or tens, if not hundreds, of organizations. So the idea that you can canvas that effectively is a challenge. But fundamentally, it comes back down to, and again, not to sound too trite or try to sound too trite here, but it comes down to the visibility that you have,
Mm.
and the ability to make decisions in real time. Requires a certain level of visibility into operations, and that visibility is enabled by certainly operational procedures, but also the technology that is being used to support those operations. So put it in the context of e-commerce versus traditional B2B. Certainly in e-commerce, what we have seen has been, I would probably say, a greater level of innovation, and a
Mm.
greater sort of acceptance of some of the some of the advances that we've seen around supply chain technologies, especially when it comes to automation. I think just the pressure and the volume and the speed required certainly drove that. And you throw into there some of the challenges around labor and access to labor and effective application and use of labor. Sort of really forced sort of e-commerce organizations to sort of advance sort of their capabilities. So I think that they were probably, at least recently, at the forefront of that. Whether they're the lion's share or traditional B2B is the lion's share, I think that's debatable. But we've certainly seen, a level
Right.
of investment
Yeah.
around automation to provide that flexibility, because e-commerce, the theme over the last years, and again, not just because of the pandemic, even leading into it, was sort of omni-channel, multi-channel sort of capabilities. And to be able to do that, you really need, and to do it right, you need to have visibility. If you're fulfilling from a store versus a traditional
Right.
fulfillment center versus a warehouse versus what have you, those systems have to speak to one another. Otherwise, it's and when you're dealing with item level decision making, item level interactions, customer experience, customer engagement, rests is rests on that one experience, on that one transaction. So you got to get
Mm.
that one right. Otherwise, I mean, you're gonna deal with a lot of sort of customer service related and dissatisfaction related issues. So I think that's certainly where we've seen a little bit of um, sort of the emphasis around innovation over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I end up in that conversation a lot, where it's kind of like, is e-commerce driving it? And yeah, it is for sure. E-commerce is a
Mm.
market. It is not the market. Like, e-commerce concerns
Yeah.
certainly affected a huge amount of retail customers, particularly during the pandemic, and that became a huge focus, and obviously a huge amount of investment, a huge amount of innovation. But I do think that also uncovered uh, kind of where people had to look at things holistically. So e-commerce resulted in a huge innovation leap in picking, for example, but then it could be bottlenecked further down the chain at shipping or something. You have something that's 1,000% more efficient, and then you shove it into a system that is not 1,000% more efficient on the back end. You could, by
Mm.
doing the right thing, by succeeding in that one thing, you could actually end up kind of getting hurt. So I think it's been really interesting to look at that. And when you look at the larger market as a whole, if you make bolts for bridges, you don't care about any of that stuff. If you're in lumber or something, you don't care
Yeah.
about any of that, right? But some of those same concerns traverse all of that. Locationing is just as relevant to them as to e-commerce, and those underlying systems are what feed all of the other innovation that we're talking about, and sort of where it's all headed. So I think that's one of the interesting things that the report sort of sussed out year over year was in
Mm.
2021 and 2022, by a mile, the number one priority was speed. If you weren't talking about how you were making things
Mm.
faster, you weren't winning deals, and by like a 50% margin. Right. The next one was about labor optimization, but the distant third was accuracy. So it was just kind of
Mhm.
get the box out the door. Don't care what if it's the right one or whatever, right? But we can see now in the data those things sort of pulling even a bit. Getting the accuracy almost doubled. The accuracy as a strategic initiative almost doubled, and I think that's speaking to the customer experience. Like David was saying, that's becoming much more important. It's not just about getting the box out the door with speed. It's about making sure that the customer has a good experience. And I think it's also interesting that the labor optimization also pulled even with speed, in that it kind of
Yeah.
implies people are more conscious of the holistic supply chain and getting more out of the resources that they have. Getting better result from what they have operating in the warehouse today. I thought that was one of the most insightful bits out of the whole report.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's very interesting to see that trend, because we did certainly see, especially during the pandemic, when everybody was looking to get things on demand, basically, and we saw a lot
Right.
of companies rise up and say, some stuff. I mean, even as crazy as we could deliver in 15 minutes, right? And I think it's interesting to see, even as we look at the market in general, some of those companies, didn't make it pretty much past the pandemic, right?
Right.
So it's interesting to see now, like, the consumer really wants that perfect order, like that's discussed in the study, and have that accuracy, like you said, and deliver it at the right time, and deliver it the way it's supposed to be delivered, in the most cost effective way. all those things kind of matter now, which all kind of come together in creating that perfect customer
Right.
experience, right? So it's very interesting to see that change there, and see, how the consumer is maybe pushing back a little bit and saying like, it was nice maybe to have
Yeah.
speed, in the past, but like now, like, hey, like, you guys got to get this right, right? Right. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, so I think it's very interesting to see that change, as you mentioned there, Justin. But we mentioned in there a couple of times about the labor optimization as well, and I want to dig into that a little bit.
So we're going to hold that thought right there, and we will continue the conversation with Justin and David on the next episode of the New Warehouse podcast. Be sure to tune in as we dive further into the conversation around gaining more productivity from your workforce, utilizing technology, and discussing some of the top technologies on the minds of operation decision makers. For more information, head to thenewwarehouse.com and check out the show notes.